Hey everybody, Zach again, newtotorah.com, coming in, making a video for you today, and I know my website's down. A lot of you guys have emailed me. I'm working on that, trying to figure out what the deal is with the hosting company. It's some kind of billing issue. But thanks for the emails on that. I really appreciate it. So today we're going to talk about this whole Paul dilemma, this thing going on. This is nothing new. I remember in my days, see, those of you who have been in evangelism, for any period of time, understand that you come across this quite a bit, and it's in different forms. The falling away. It's the parable of the sower. I always talk about the parable of the sower, number one, because Yeshua said it is the most important parable. Do you not know this parable? How then will you know all parables, he says. So that's one of the reasons I keep bringing it up. It's the key to understanding all of his other parables, the good fish and the bad fish, the wise virgins and the foolish virgins, the sheep and the goats, and so the new bottles and the old bottles. It's the parable of the sower. And so when someone comes out, like just recently happened with Justin Best and Christian Truthers, denying Paul and ripping out, 2/3 of his New Testament, it's just playing out over and over again. And I can call him out publicly because, let's be honest here, he declared this all publicly. I think we can all address it publicly. Anyway, I saw this in Christianity. In Christianity, you have new believers who spring up, just like the parable of the sower describes, and they spring up and they're all excited about their newfound faith and this new thing called Jesus and how it's going to fix everything in their life. They spring up all excited, and then as they're hungry for the word and they're hungry for knowledge, they go out and they seek different things and they're researching, and they come across something like zeitgeist. I don't know about you guys, but I have seen so many new believers who spring up, just like the parable of the sower describes. They have no depth of root, and they have no deep roots, and they find something like zeitgeist, and it completely destroys them. Or a new Christian who has accepted, maybe went to youth group, and a young Christian, and they accept Jesus as their Messiah, and they say the sinner's prayer. They go off to college out of youth group, and their professors are just there waiting for them, ready to sink their teeth into them and show them all the things that are wrong with the Bible and all the contradictions that are within, and destroy that new believer's faith because they had no depth of root. One of my favorites in Christianity was the Arius Calpurnius Piso. Arius Calpurnius Piso, because Arius Calpurnius Piso, don't you know, he made up the entire New Testament. He was this aristocrat in the Roman Senate who had, wealthy ties to all of the big wigs, and he basically wrote the New Testament from scratch and fooled everybody. He made up Jesus completely. It's all a fraud. Arius Calpurnius Piso. I just like saying that for some reason. It's all a fraud. It's all fake. It was made up on the internet by a bunch of college kids back in the early billboard days of the internet. And it got so popular because, and college professors even made college courses centered around Arius Calpurnius Piso. Meanwhile, people who have studied antiquity, who are real historians, they're like, Arius Calpurnius Piso never existed. There's not one papyrus, one scroll, one document, one tablet that bears that name. It's all fake. But people ate it up because it plays into their narrative that the Bible is a fraud and that there's no such thing as God and it's all fake anyway. And so, we'll just cling on to this thing and promote it as truth, Arius Calpurnius Piso, and the guy never existed. But it destroyed a lot of people. It destroys a lot of people's faith. People who have no depth of root. No depth of root, it says. And it's the same thing in the Torah movement. Messianic, Hebrew roots, whatever you want to call us. They hear something in their ears about Paul, about Yeshua, not lining up with the prophets, not lining up with whatever, and off they go. Either they are picked up by the fowl of the air, as the parable says, or they are the plants that spring up with no depth of root, and the first sign of sunlight, the tribulation, temptation, persecution that the text describes, they wither and fade. And I've seen it over and over again, and many of you have too. And that's what we have here. It's the same thing. And the arguments are absolutely ridiculous, and I'm not going to go through them all. David Wilber did a really good write-up on these, and so I would urge you to go check those out. I'll leave a link in the description below to his article where he addresses each one of them. Absolutely ridiculous. And so check out those. When people come to you, and the arguments are just regurgitated, That's why I believe what we have here is someone who just heard these things from somewhere else and then went back and studied them and then just claimed them as his own. And I know, Justin, you didn't study an ounce because most of the verses you can't even memorize when you recite them. You had to go look up everything. Every verse you had to bring up, you had to almost look up every single one of them because you had nothing memorized, which tells me you haven't studied. That was my first clue as I watched your 2-hour presentation. And I watched all of it. It was just horrible, and it was very apparent to me that you had not studied anything. You didn't even know where the Acts 10 vision was. You didn't even know it was in Acts 10, Peter's vision. Absolutely ridiculous. So where do we go from here? Let's go ahead and talk about one of the things that really stood out to me and I'm passionate about because I think it really helps a lot of understanding is your idea that Paul mentions the word conscience over and over again in Scripture, in his letters, and that tells you that Paul is telling the reader that they can do whatever they want. It's up to you. Whatever you see is right in your own eyes, up to your own conscience. You can do it because it's all up to your conscience. It's up to what you decide. That's not what Paul's saying at all. Let's take a look at the first time. Paul uses the word conscience, by the way, 27 times, give or take, depending on your translation, 27 times in his letters. Let's take a look at, I think, one of the first times he uses it in the book of Romans, chapter 2, verse 15. For when the Gentiles, which have not the law, do by nature the things contained in the law, these, having not the law, are a law unto themselves. Very interesting. We'll get back to that. Next verse, verse 15, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience bearing witness. The conscience bears witness. Because see, my friends, the conscience bears witness to the law. The Gentiles, he's talking about the Gentiles. Ray Comfort does a fantastic job of providing an analogy for this point. Fantastic. It's World War II. You have two spies looking to connect so that they can pass messages between the Allies, right? So one goes into a bar, he sits down, orders a drink. The next spy comes into the bar, sees what is probably his contact, sits down next to him, orders a drink, and says, the ducks fly at midnight. And the other spy says, the brown cow eats the green grass. And so there's a connection there. They know that they are the two spies, that were supposed to meet. And now they can work and communicate with each other for the sake of the Allies. It's the same thing. You can take the most ardent atheist, the most ardent Bible-hating, evolutionist, and you can connect with his conscience. You can see him subconsciously start to nod when you talk about things about lying, how it's wrong to lie, how it's wrong to steal, how it's wrong to commit adultery, how it's wrong to commit murder. Because see, that person's conscience knows subconsciously what it's like to have those things trespassed against him. He knows the hurts that's involved. I mean, I grew up in St. Louis. I had my car broken in. I mean, you haven't lived in St. Louis until you've had your car broken into at least once or twice. I had my radio stolen. First time I think I had my radio stolen out of my car was in high school. And I remember what it felt like. I felt so violated. It felt so horrible, not knowing who had done this and why. And, the shine of life is off the apple, So, but you know what I mean? You feel the violence. So everyone knows what it feels like when these things happen against you. And so the conscience bears witness of the law. Because see, these Gentiles that Paul is referring to in verse 14 of Romans chapter 2, see, I had memorized. See, that comes with study. I didn't have to relook at it. He knows these Gentiles because the Gentiles know. Some of them their conscience will acknowledge they know it's wrong to lie. They know it's wrong to steal. They know it's wrong to sleep with your neighbor's wife or to commit murder because they know the pain that's involved. When those things happen to them, the conscience bears witness. Now, conscience, meaning with knowledge. In the Greek, it's syneidesis. It means with knowledge. With knowledge. With knowledge of what? Now, Paul's verses, all the times he uses the word conscious, might take on a little bit different meaning. Just might. It's possible. But see, that comes with some study. That comes with some knowledge. But see, some people are without knowledge. But see, when Paul talks about conscience with knowledge, it's about with the knowledge of sin, with the knowledge of the law. I think we need to re-examine some things here. Let's take a look at one of the points you made in your presentation. The issue begins at 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 4, and also we're going to do 1 Corinthians chapter 10, but we'll just read a few verses here to begin with. Starting at verse 4, as concerning therefore the eating of those things which are offered in sacrifice unto idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father of whom all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, by whom all are all things, and we by him. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge, for some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. But meat commendeth us not to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, neither if we eat not are we the worse. But take heed, lest any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. For if any man see thee which has knowledge sit to eat in the idol's temple, shall not the conscience with knowledge of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? And through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? Okay, so there it is in a nutshell. And then let's go ahead and read some verses in chapter 10. Now, we're going to start here at verse 27. If any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and you be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you eat, asking no question for conscience sake. But if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Right there. So the issue that these people are having, that Justin's having, that some other people are having, is that, he's talking about conscience, and their argument is, well, Paul's saying it's up to your conscience whether you eat it or not. It's okay to eat it because it's up to your conscience. When the Torah very clearly says in Numbers chapter 25, we're going to read that in just a second, that you should not eat it, and that God was very angry when these people ate meat sacrificed to idols. Let's go to Numbers chapter 25, verse 1. And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab, and they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. So here you have God's people who are sacrificing meat, animals, unto their idols, and they're eating them, and God calls it whoredom. So there's a big issue here. If Paul's saying you can eat whatever you want, even if it's meat sacrificed to idols, it's up to your conscience, then we have a big problem. That's not what he's saying. He said, eat not. Eat not. If you know. And let's keep in mind, let's just go back to the very first verse in chapter 8 and read the very first part of that verse. Check out this. It says, as concerning therefore. Understand that neither you nor I have the letter that was given to Paul that Paul is now responding to. The people in Corinth, which was part of the Roman Empire, it was the provincial capital for Greece set up by the Romans. In the Roman Empire, they have issues because there's a disagreement in their fellowship. We don't know exactly what was in the letter that was given to Paul. All we have is Paul's response to the people in Corinth who lived in the Roman Empire, a pagan, idolatrous empire. And we know from studies of Corinth, and I have this amazing book right here. It's called Paganism in the Roman Empire. Fantastic book. Highly recommend it. It was written by Ramsey McMullen by Yale Press. All kinds of fantastic information on, number one, where some of the traditions in our churches get started and how they were melded into the Roman Empire. There's a chapter in the back on that. And then also it mentions even Corinth and some of Paul's writings and this whole issue. The issue was these fellowships, listen, if you're like me, if you're not like me, I have sheep in my backyard. Okay. You probably don't have sheep in your backyard. You probably don't have cattle in your backyard. So if you're like most people, you don't have these things. And even people like then, when they wanted to have a meal, when they wanted to have some sort of celebration, they come together for Shabbat, somebody goes out and buys a big thing of meat and brings it back and they cook it. And then someone at the fellowship comes in and says, I can't eat that. Where did you buy that? Well, I don't know, at the marketplace down over there by the end of town. Oh my, don't you know that there's meat sacrificed to idols in that marketplace? And sure enough, according to this book, a lot of the times when meat was sacrificed in these temples, a lot of it would go to retailers that would then be resold to the general public. Because, see, you could do that. We even see this in the Bible. Even the Father allows this. It's Leviticus chapter 7. See, I have that memorized because I study. Leviticus chapter 7 gives the circumstances for a peace offering or Thanksgiving offering to be able to be consumed by you. And we see this by Jesse in 1 Samuel chapter 16, another memorization. 1 Samuel chapter 16, Samuel brings an offering to Bethlehem and he sacrifices it and shares it with Jesse. But before they eat it, he brings David in from the field. Let's go ahead and read that. Let's go ahead and read 1 Samuel chapter 16, starting at verse 2. And Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I am come to sacrifice to the Lord. And call Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do, and you shall anoint me him whom I name unto you." And so if you scroll down, if you get to this verse 11, and Samuel said unto Jesse, "Are here all your children?" And he said, "Well, there remains yet one, the youngest, and he, behold, he keeps the sheep." And Samuel said unto Jesse, "Send, fetch him, for we will not sit down till he comes." See, they're getting ready to eat. We're not going to eat until he comes. I have to do this first. We're going to do this first, then we're going to eat. Okay? See, that was something that was allowed by Torah, Leviticus chapter 7. You can bring your animal to the altar, sacrifice it, take some of it, and then take it home and eat it with whoever, or eat it there or wherever, and share it with some, and consume part of the animal. The pagans did the exact same thing. Some was given to the priest. It talks about the processes, very bloody, a horrible, they didn't have a lot of the cleanliness things that are spelled out in Leviticus when it comes to the altar and the tabernacle. And so it was just horrific, some of the conditions at some of these temples, these pagan temples. That was one of the, I did a whole video on baptism and why it's not a New Testament thing. It's an Old Testament. Wash, be unclean unto even. Hebrew people are a very clean people compared to the pagans. They were dirty, disgusting even. So, but see, the Father allows this to take place. And the people in Corinth were having an issue in Paul's day saying, hey, they're bringing these possible meats into the home to eat, and they might be, possibly, could be, by chance, have been a sacrifice to an idol at a temple. And all Paul is saying, guys, is if you don't know, you don't know. Don't have an inquisition. Don't have a third degree about this meat or that meat, and if where it's been, for every second of its life or afterlife. He says, just eat. Now, if someone says that this meat is sacrificed to an idol, what does he say? Verse 28 of chapter 10, eat not. But if any man says unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not. I mean, done. Period. How is that against Torah? If you don't know, you don't. See, there's a difference. There's a circumcision of the heart. If you know, you can't compare someone who's eating out of ignorance, without knowledge, without conscience, to someone in the desert in Numbers chapter 25 who willingly goes out with the pagan people there and are sacrificing meat to their idols and their gods and sitting down and eating it to those gods. There's a difference. There's someone who's willingly participating and someone who just doesn't know. How is that against Paul? How is Paul erring here? How is that against Torah? You got to be insane. You got to be looking for a reason to throw Paul out of your Bible. And some of you guys are. Some of you guys love the controversy. Some of you guys love the drama. You love, getting people all riled up. Some people live for the next fix of how I can shock people of my new beliefs. See, that's what's happening here. I see that a lot. I call them Hebrew drama queens. You're always looking for something. And there are people in the Christian church who do the exact same thing. Again, the whole Arius, Calpurnius, Piso, I can shock everybody with this zeitgeist stuff. It's people out there who just look for trouble. They look for the next thing, and they get a fix over it. They do. They really, really do. You got to really be looking for a way to throw Paul out of the Bible. Maybe it's just because you haven't studied enough. And obviously your presentation proved that to me. So maybe you aren't looking for drama. Maybe you aren't looking for a fix. Maybe you're really confused. But I'm telling you, if that's the case, you're confused because you haven't studied enough, you haven't read your Bible enough, you haven't actually thought about these verses, maybe studied different translations and how it's presented. Because the Christian church, the way they see it, is that the law was done away with. The Torah doesn't matter anymore. There is no sin anymore. And we can do whatever we want. So it doesn't matter if we ate, food sacrificed to idols. That's the Christian perspective. But no, we know the Torah is forever. We know the Torah is valid, still today. Well, that's easy to explain than this. If that's the case, he says, eat not. It's like the whole halal meat and kosher meat, that's the thing that's going around today. And I get the emails, and it's a valid question for a beginner, for someone who's new to this stuff. The whole halal meats, it's not meat sacrificed to idols, folks. It's a shakedown. It's a common modern day Jesse Jackson shakedown. Business owner who makes chicken. I've got all these people over here, and they'll buy your product if you put my label on your packaging. Oh, really? How do I do that? Well, there's a few things you have to do. We have to come in and, inspect your facility. We have to make sure it's clean. We have to make sure there's no pork products here. And we have to just go down our checklist, just a few things. Oh, wow, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that. Okay, well, there's just one more thing. You have to cut me a check every single month. How much? Well, it's, I'll just write all these zeros on this piece of paper here for you. There you go. And then all these people will buy my product? Yep, all my people will buy your product. And that's what happens. My mother-in-law worked for Pilgrim's Pride in Texas. Their headquarters is in Mount Pleasant, Texas. And while they lived there, she worked in the billing department. And every month would come an invoice, or every other month or whatever it was, would come an invoice. And it was for a local imam or some imam who was coming in and saying a prayer, supposedly, and collecting his paycheck. Because that's what they do. They come in, they say a prayer, and then they collect a check. It's a shakedown. There's no meat sacrificed to idol. There's no temple involved. There's no altar. There's no animal that died itself. The animals are long dead before they get there. And they're just processed at the plant. They're not, there's no altar. There's no sacrifice. It's just a prayer. It's a shakedown. And the kosher people do it too. It's like, you want my little U or K or P or whatever it is on my packaging, then, I come in, I say a prayer, I make sure you ain't got no pork products here, and you're cleaning your facility properly, and, you give me a check, and then you can put my label on your packaging. And then all the Jews in New York City or Brooklyn or whatever will buy your product. It's a total shakedown. It's a scam. But people are convinced this is meat sacrificed to idols. It's not. Every Thanksgiving it comes up Butterball. Butterball supposedly is, broadcasting imam Muslim prayers or whatever over the loudspeakers at all the Butterball factories. Folks, there's a Butterball factory 30 minutes down the road from here. I know people who work in that factory. I know people who have worked in that factory. And there ain't no loudspeaker or prayer or Muslim anything in there. I ask everyone I go in there, everyone I find, hey, how you doing? Such and such, where do you work at? I work at the Butterball plant. Oh, really? Have you ever heard any Muslim prayers in there? What? No, this is America. This is, the middle of Bible Belt America, gun-toting America. There's no imam Muslim prayers at the Butterball plant down the road. So, it's ridiculous, but people buy into that, and they think, no, it's not. There's a stupid imam who comes in, maybe at some of the plants, not all of them, says a 5-minute prayer supposedly, probably sits in his car, and then just picks up his check and goes on. It's a shakedown. But they put that little halal thing on there, and you guys get all freaked and weirded out. And Paul's like, hey guys, listen, it's not meat sacrificed to idols. These gods aren't even real anyway. Don't get weirded out over this stuff. And you think you're ready to throw Paul out of the Bible because of just that simple misunderstanding. And all of your reasons were just stupid, simple misunderstandings. As a result that you haven't studied enough, or the fact that you want to cause controversy and get your fix. It's one of the two. One of the two. And folks, this is why the parable of the sower is so important. That parable of the sower. Mark chapter 4, verse 4. And it came to pass, as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and the fowls of the air came and devoured it up. And some fell on stony ground, where it had not much earth. And immediately it sprang up, because it had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, it was scorched. And because it had no root, it withered away. How deep are your roots? We'll leave it at that. Go home, read your Bible. Thanks.